The Oversight Committee exists to secure two fundamental principles. First, Americans have a right to know that the money Washington takes from them is well spent. And second, Americans deserve an efficient, effective government that works for them. Our duty on the Oversight and Government Reform Committee is to protect those rights. Our solemn responsibility is to hold government accountable to taxpayers, because taxpayers have a right to know what they get from their government. It's our job to work tirelessly in partnership with citizen watchdogs to deliver the facts to the American people and bring genuine reform to the federal bureaucracy. Today's hearing particularly touches on taxpayers and what taxpayers should expect from their government. It continues the committee's investigation into the IRS's inappropriate treatment of groups applying for tax-exempt status. It is now our understanding that some of those groups were 501c3s, groups for whom you receive a tax deduction if you give, and that the vast majority were 501c4s, groups for whom you do not receive a tax deduction for your contribution, but who do not pay the same corporate taxes on that income. This scandal first came to light via a planted question directed at Lois Lerner's request at the American Bar Association event in May 10th. Prior to the planting of that question, designed to obstruct the truth about targeting and break the news to a sympathetic audience that Friday afternoon, this committee had worked with our Inspector General for Treasury for more than 10 months. Multiple committees of the House of Representatives had wanted answers, had sought answers, and were waiting on those answers. In response to the planted question, Lois Lerner blamed the inappropriate IRS activities of line people in Cincinnati. The IRS hoped we believe the IRS hoped this would make the scandal quickly dissipate. It did not. And in fact, today we are going to hear from one of those line employees in Cincinnati. But our committee has heard from many of those line employees. We've also begun hearing from people they reported to or exchanged information with in Washington. Sadly, the White House press secretary continues a narrative characterizing it as inappropriate conduct by IRS officials in Cincinnati. Today's hearing needs to dispel that so we can begin following the witnesses and following the testimony and following the truth wherever it leads. We are now convinced, and we will hear testimony, that as the Inspector General found in his investigation/audit, what began in Cincinnati with one case of a Tea Party application soon was, in fact, in Washington at levels well above line employees. They stated the assertions Cincinnati was to blame were absurd, and we will hear that today. More importantly, it is now understood that these files, these hundreds of files, were in many, many hands, many of whom were not in Cincinnati. As we look for the truth, let us bear in mind that we can debunk many things along the way. We will probably never debunk all accusations, nor should we make accusations unless testimony and evidence takes us there. We can today, I believe, debunk the accusations that Cincinnati was in fact the source, or that it didn't go to Washington, which it clearly did. Particularly when we hear from the Honorable Russell George, the IG who brought us this, and his staff, I think we're going to find out more within the limits of his ability to tell us. I certainly want to make sure that the smear stops here today. I want to caution the ladies and gentlemen on both sides of the aisle here. We will work with what we know, and we will work to find out what we do not know. And I, for one, and I hope everyone on both sides of the dais, will reject categorically assumptions for which there is not evidence. It is difficult to say who should have come forward first. We know one thing: conservative groups came forward with their accusations more than 10 months ago, and they were heard. We know that, in fact, members of both parties sent letters to the IRS, and I believe that is an important area that this committee cannot overlook. Everything we have learned of real substance begins with Mr. George's impartial, independent investigation of IRS treatment of tax-exempt organizations and the targeting of them since March of 2010. Our investigation will continue. I hope that both my side of the aisle and the ranking member's side of the aisle will be very careful and cautious in what we say. When I say something goes to the office of the consul of the IRS, that is not to be construed as the office of the President or to the consul himself. It is important that we understand that words matter, nuances matter, and that we not go one step beyond what we know. What we do know today, and what I believe we're going to hear, is that, in fact, Washington made a catastrophic mistake in taking what would have been, in the ordinary course, an individual, one-by-one application, evaluating them, as Mr. Hull has done for 48 years, accepting them, denying them, or asking for more information, and not looking at them as a group with some sort of special cynicism. That's not what America expects. America does not expect people targeted as groups. One of the questions I will ask today will be, if they were fairly evaluated, wouldn't some of these cases have been resolved if they were not lumped into a group? I may not get an answer today, but I will not cease until I get that answer. Lastly, there have been accusations leveled against the Inspector General and the work that he has done and his team has done. This committee is the most important place to resolve that. We have oversight over all the Inspector Generals. We control the legislation that created the position, and we take seriously accusations about their independence. We will investigate it, but as of right now, we stand solidly behind the best efforts of all our Inspector Generals. If a credible accusation occurs, we will take it up. Lastly, Mr. Ranking Member, I want to make sure that I make something clear. You're frustrated about 6103 and its interpretation, and you've made that clear. I'm frustrated about it. I believe this committee must ensure that the fair interpretation of this law designed to protect taxpayers' confidential information is in fact not used to re-victimize people who have previously been victimized. And I will work with the ranking member and anyone else to make sure we protect victims from being kept from finding out what actually happened to them, and the public as appropriate. With that, I recognize the ranking member.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman.